Welcome, everyone. We are back for another episode of Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. My name is Megan, and my amazing co-host is...
Amanda.
Welcome, welcome. If you are new to our show, we are the Imperfect Homeschool Mom Podcast. We do not portray perfect, shiny images. There's oat flour on my kitchen floor, and it's been there for 2 days, and nobody's had a chance to sweep it up yet. I mean, it's not tragic, but it's not amazing. Yeah. So we do not hide our messes. We bring real, unfiltered reality to our podcast. So, what's our topic for the day, Amanda?
So today we are talking about finding your homeschooling people and the power and the struggle, right, of finding secular homeschoolers.
Ooh, is it so we live in really different environments, the two of us. I have homeschooled only in the South, generally speaking, the Southeast, because of my husband's job. I've homeschooled in 4 states, which are Florida, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Texas. So if you're looking to find a secular homeschool crowd, those are probably some of the least popular places that I would recommend for you to do that. But you've kind of got a different experience where you are, right, Amanda?
I mean, yes and no. So we're in Southern California, and one would think that it's a lot easier. And I would say it probably is easier comparatively, especially when you add in the layer of the fact that we homeschool through a public charter, right? So legally, you have to use secular curriculum to homeschool through a public charter. That does not change the fact that even when I go to socials for our public charter, there is a lot of church talk. So I don't think that aspect of homeschooling and the homeschool community has changed yet. Even here locally, the biggest, most popular community building group, and they're so proud of the fact that they have thousands of members. It's a paid membership, and they have tons of things, and they have tons of subgroups, and you have all these great little community groups, and they're super close, and they meet multiple times a week, and they have all kinds of amazing things, and they are very, very churchy. So it's still a thing.
So I'm not celebrating your struggle, but I'm a little bit consoled by the fact that it's not just me and my location, right?
Yeah.
It can be really tough. I mean, when we lived in North Carolina, so listen, whatever religion you want to practice, I am thrilled for you, right? Happy for you, as long as you are not hurting anyone or really that's my defining line, right? As long as your religion does not harm anyone, thrilled for you, right? Do it. You're Christian, you're Jewish, you're Muslim, you worship chickens, I really don't care. Like, just don't harm anyone else in the process, and don't try to make me do it, right? Every time we talk, I don't want to be like, oh, here she comes, she's going to talk to me about her next chicken worship ceremony, like, I don't want to get roped into that sort of thing. But when we lived in North Carolina, it was a standard conversation opener, in the same way that you'd open a conversation with, like, hey, does your son play any sports? Or, what's your favorite genre of book to read? It was, what church do you go to? That was a conversation opener. And so we knew very clearly and we are a moderate religious family, like not super duper religious, but, we don't fit in that crowd, right? It's not our crowd. And so it becomes really tough to fit in when you're constantly made to feel like you're different or not welcome, or whatever the case might be, because there's something different about you. And in homeschooling, a lot of times that tends to be religion. That tends to be kind of the main thing. But really, I think in life, it can be anything that's different about you. It really could. It could be a whole wide variety of things. I had a post that I had shared in a homeschool group that I'm in not that long ago, asking when people felt othered in the homeschool world. And one person brought up that their child is disabled and uses a wheelchair. And the events that their homeschool group schedules are trampoline parks, field days with sack races, all this kind of stuff. And I'm thinking, how big could this group be that they don't acknowledge that this child is there and is being excluded? That you would think that you would do board game days and things like that, so, to make sure that there's an inclusive factor. So it seems like there's a lot of ways that people are excluded in the homeschool community, but also just in life, that people just aren't taking into consideration other people's needs.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally true, right? I mean, the religion aspect is an easy one because it is homeschooling is traditionally very dominated by Christians and quite conservative Christians. Um, Full disclosure, we don't church. Like we don't church full stop, and it's taught in our home as a mythology, a living mythology, but a mythology nonetheless. So I'll just put that out there for anyone who's watching. Like, take what I say with that understanding. And the same for us, it's the same thing. I have some great friends who are deeply religious, and I respect that as long as you're not constantly trying to convince me that I need to change who I am. Because if you're constantly trying to convince me to change who I am, I'm happy to try to convince you to change who you are. But I just don't think that's really the solid foundation for a good relationship, right? Friendship or otherwise. Um, so,
Yeah.
but, beyond that, you're absolutely right. There are a lot of ways that it's quite divided. I was looking at some statistics for a different episode that we did about the ethnic makeup of homeschoolers, right? And obviously, we sit here, two white women, doing a homeschooling podcast, and it's not a surprise because we're the vast majority of homeschoolers. But those other segments, they're growing for very good reason. But I can only imagine that that feels othering and, off-putting. I know for us personally, we live in the urban core of a city, right? Skyscrapers and public transportation. And there aren't a ton of families here to begin with. And of those families, many of them choose to send their children to school because of where we live. A lot of that is actually private school, but there's some public schooling happening too. But I have a disability. I can't easily drive out to meetups, and there are not very many things here in the city, right? There's just not a huge, you don't think of like, oh, I bet people who live in the city get together, you know, at the bar for their homeschooling meetups. I mean, we do sometimes, don't get me wrong. There's been plenty at kid-friendly breweries or whatever, but it's different and people don't understand it, right? Anytime you do something that's different, anytime you don't have a yard to go out into, or anything that's different is hard for people to understand. And when they don't understand, it's so much harder to build that foundation that you need for a good community.
Mm-hmm. Especially, I think too, when you're saying they don't understand, but really where you're starting, you're not even starting a block away from one another, theoretically speaking. You're starting on different planets.
Yeah.
So my kids and I were volunteering one time during the holiday season, and we had a conversation starter that began with, "So what church do you go to?" And I said, "We're Jewish. We don't go to church." And we were in an area where the Jewish community was like us and four other people. And the guy, while we were standing there doing volunteer work, told us that we were going to hell. I mean, just flat out. There was like no ifs, ands, or buts about it, right? And so I'm like, I can't even have a logical conversation with you if that's our starting point. I mean,
Yeah.
we're not going to end up in the same place. So we just kind of went our separate
Okay.
ways. And yeah, thanks. Thanks for the heads up. It's like, I'm not really concerned about it, but sure. Thank you for the heads up. So it becomes really difficult to bridge those divides when the divides are that big, where
Yeah.
you're not even kind of just in this, we do things a little bit differently sort of way, but just we see the world very differently. It makes it harder to bridge some of those things. So religion makes us not fit in some homeschool circles, right?
Yeah.
Is there do you find anything else that makes you feel like you don't fit in? I know you mentioned disability, urban lifestyle. Anything else that you've experienced?
Yeah. I mean, I think it can be hard to find progressive homeschoolers. it's new and it's growing. It's not new. I'm sure it's not that new, but it's definitely a growing group within the homeschool community. But finding them, especially because, how do you find them, right? I don't know about you, but I'm in my local homeschool group and it's got thousands and thousands of people in there. And so, am I looking at every post? No, I'm not looking at every post that goes up. And in fact, I ignore a huge number of them because I I don't have any suggestions or recommendations for which Bible study you should use this year, or I mean, it's just that thing. But so it's hard to put yourself out there and say, hey, I'm wanting to set up a secular group, who wants to join me, because that there's going to be someone, like to your story, who wants to pop on that thread and tell you that you shouldn't have a secular homeschool group. So it's just hard, no matter how you're different. And then, there's those issues of not wanting to push too hard, right? So like I mentioned, I'm disabled. It's hard for me to drive on the interstate on a regular basis. And because of where we live, you have to get on the interstate almost everywhere for anything. Even just to go 10 minutes, you hop on the interstate and hop off the interstate. And I feel bad about always being like, hey, could we meet downtown? Could we meet at this big park? Like, I appreciate when they do. And I have this one group in particular that meets at one of the parks close to us at least once or twice a year. But it's hard to build community only meeting once or twice a year, you know? Um, what else? I think, we travel a lot. And that's hard for some people to, again, I don't think it's judgment so much as they just don't understand it. And assumptions are made, right? If you travel a lot, people assume that you're really well off or that you're coming from this different place. And, I won't lie, we're comfortable, but I'm not spending nearly as much on travel as they think I am, right? It's that points hacking and travel hacking and deals and the willingness to say, oh, I saw a great deal on an airfare from this listserv that I'm on, and let's go to this random place that I never thought about going because there's really cheap tickets.
Yep.
And trying to have that conversation in the context of a homeschool group where you're talking about other things, and you're trying to keep an eye on the kids and all of that. It's hard. It's hard.
Yeah.
How about you? What other kind of areas or ways do you feel like it's hard to make that connection?
As my kids have gotten older, one of the things that has made it harder for us to make connection is our choice of homeschool style. So when my kids were younger and we would play with kids at the park and things like that, sometimes people would say like homeschooled kids are different than public schooled kids. And there are going to be ways that they're different. It doesn't make it better or worse. It's just there's going to be differences. They're leading a very different existence for the vast majority of their waking hours. So they are going to be a little bit different. And so I feel like people are pretty good. Like I can spot a homeschooler in the wild sometimes, right? Can you spot that, Amanda? Like you'll start talking to somebody and I'll be like, you homeschool, right? I mean, you can just tell the way they talk is different as far as the way they talk about their life, their experience, their schedule, things they're doing, their whatever. You can just tell sometimes. And they'll be like, yeah, I'm homeschooled. And I'm like, yeah, we stand out in a good way, but we stand out. Right.
Mm.
So I've always kind of known that that divide exists or that difference exists really between public schooled kids or traditionally schooled kids and homeschooled kids. As my kids have gotten older, there has been this kind of chasm that has opened up between traditional or academic homeschoolers and unschoolers, that their experiences are just so vastly different. And at this point, they've been living it for so long that their paths have diverged so much that it makes it a little bit tough. Now, that's not to say it's all unschoolers and all homeschoolers, and it's not to say one's better or worse. It's just, it's such a different experience. So in my experience, many unschoolers are pretty typically free range. There's a lot of free ranging going on, which kind of makes sense, right? You're letting your child's education take a natural course, that's got a pretty free range mentality to it.
Mhm.
So, and of course, people who are traditionally homeschooling have more influence, more say, more um, steering
Mhm.
potentially going on than people who are unschooling and who are kind of following where the universe takes them to some extent. And so I started a group locally, and the kids in it are lovely. They're very sweet kids, et cetera, et cetera. But the difference in sheltering
Mm.
between my kids and the other kids is huge. And listen, I'm not telling you I'm doing it right and they're doing it wrong. I could totally be screwing this entire thing up, and the therapy bills are going to be massive. So I'm not
Yeah.
saying my kids are amazing and these kids live under rocks. That's not at all what I'm saying. But the freedom that my kids have is totally different than the freedoms that the other kids have. And so when they'll bring stuff up and they're having conversations about world events or going here or going there or an experience that they've had, they're on completely different blocks when they're having these conversations. And so it's been interesting because we've been starting to lean in a little bit more to finding our people in the unschooling community. And that's not local. I mean, we do have, so Charleston is the low country. We do have a low country unschooler group, and I'm in that group, etc. Um, but we've been looking bigger than that. So my oldest son went to Not Back to School Camp last year, which is an unschooling camp for teens. And to give you an idea of the free range unschooling mentality, I sent him off to Vermont. He was 15 at the time. I sent him off to Vermont. He had to fly from Charleston to LaGuardia, LaGuardia to Burlington. And I said, if you need any help in LaGuardia, but he wasn't an unaccompanied minor. He was 15. He was good to go. And the email from the camp said that he would pick up the shuttle to camp in Burlington. And it said, I think it was something like, if you see a really confident group of self-directed teens wandering around the airport, walk up and introduce yourself, because that's the camp shuttle. Like, that's how they met the shuttle. And, there's so many people. I mean, we were at Panera Bread one time for our teen group that meets. And the soda fountain, or the drink fountain, was around a wall. You couldn't see the soda fountain from where the big table was, where all the teens were playing board games. And one of the teens got up to refill their drink. This is a teenager. Got up to refill their drink, and the mom walked around to make sure that she could see the soda fountain, and it was in her eye line. And I'm like, I shipped my kid off to Vermont, was like, find your people at the airport. If you need anything, call me. Right. So it's just a very, very different mentality. And he loved camp. He had the best time. He's going back this year. He's super excited. He also went to Berlin last year with Unschool Adventures. And then the interesting thing is, because it's unschoolers and there's a lot of travel going on, typically in the unschooling/world schooling mentality, he said, oh, so-and-so from Berlin and camp is going to be in Charleston. This kid lives in Portugal, but they're going to be in Charleston visiting family. I'm going to go downtown for the day and hang out with this person. Great. Go have fun. Let me know if you need anything. Right. I'm not calling the parents to make sure it's okay, or, tracking his phone or anything like that. He said, I'm going to lunch. Great. He checked in with me later. We're at a museum. Awesome. I don't know what museum he's at, but I'm okay with that. Right. I mean, I sent him to Berlin for a month by himself, quote unquote, by himself. He was with a group, but they had a relative amount of freedom. And so as they've gotten older, it's become harder for them to find kids who are raised in that lifestyle. They exist. There's plenty of them, but I'm not going to find them in my town necessarily. And so that's been a little tricky. I did recently discover, and when I say recently, I'm talking this week, which I'm super excited about, and I think you would quite like, that there are these world schooling hubs. Are you familiar with these?
Yeah, I'm in a lot of the groups. Yeah.
Okay, I'm in the groups now too. We're probably in the same groups. But it'll literally just be a family who's like, hey, we're setting up a 2-week thing in Bulgaria. Or there was one in the Maldives recently. And I'm like, I had to join this group after the Maldives adventure. I could have been all over that, right? And they're low budget, to your point. I mean, some of the ones that I've seen have no electricity. You're staying in a hut. I'm good with whatever. I'd rather have the experience and no electricity than the other way around. So we've been kind of leaning into some of that stuff a little bit more as the kids have gotten older. But at the same time, it would be nice to have a local group. I mean, we have a really awesome backyard. We have a really big pool and a diving board and a massive built-in trampoline and ping pong and cornhole and all this. And when I've kind of had this vision of a yard full of teenagers, and it hasn't been as easy to build that yard full of teenagers and friends coming over as I thought it would be. So that's been a little bit of a bummer.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. Um, I would guess that you probably also struggle in the same way that we do to some extent with that how to say it without it's that it's that conditioning, right? So my kiddo is gifted, and the reality is gifted does not mean high achieving. Gifted means your brain is wired differently and you think and see things differently. And it can be a real struggle for gifted kids to find their people. And so we have been looking at options in town, and trying to find, do we do the Mensa group? Do they have an active youth group? That's why he does the CTY classes and Athena's Advanced Academy. And a couple years ago, we actually flew to New York City for the summer so that he could attend a CTY camp. And it was one of those things. It was amazing for him. He absolutely loved it. He loved being with these people, and they spent their recesses talking about books and playing chess and doing these things, and he had the best time. And every day he would come home talking about how amazing it was, and the teachers, they super appreciated his thoughts, even though they don't follow the path that we might think, right? There's this idea like, will you ask a question and there's a right answer? But for a gifted kid, a lot of times there isn't a right answer. There's well, if this happens, then this would happen. And, then maybe well, there's not one right answer, right? I can obviously think of at least 10 variations of a correct answer. And for him to be specifically in a group of people who all thought that way and we're on board with it, oh, help me understand why there are 12 variations to a right answer, right? He loved it. But there are not any of those camps here. And every year I post on the groups, and I post in the parenting group because I'm like, hey, maybe I'll find some that are in the traditional schooling sphere. Maybe I'll find it in the homeschooling sphere. And every year it's like, oh, does he want to go code? That's what gifted kids do. He could not care less about coding, right?
Yeah.
No, that's not what we're looking for. And so that struggle. And I think it's every parent, right? Every parent struggles to find their community, especially as the kids get older. There is an advantage to sending your kids to brick and mortar school because they're all in the same place and they're all doing the same things, and you all have to show up to the same concerts, and you all have to fundraise, your solidarity and whatever you have to sell this month. It does create a bit of a natural community, and for the most part you all live close to each other, so it's easier to run into each other at the grocery store or to bump into each other at the park or the theater, whatever it is. And that's a lot harder to create when you're homeschooling.
Mm-hmm. And I think this is the unfiltered part of Homeschool Moms Unfiltered, right? That a lot of people say, oh, there's so many groups. There are so many groups, so many groups, but finding the one that you fit in isn't always easy. So I think the danger of saying there's so many groups, and then you have new homeschoolers. There's new homeschoolers constantly. I admin a really big homeschooling group on Facebook, and every day I'm letting in people. And we ask a question, the usual membership questions. Are you a prospective homeschooler? Have you been homeschooling 1 to 2 years, 3 to 6 years, or so long I've lost count? Those are the 4 variations. The number of prospective and 1 to 2 years far outweigh the 3 to 6 and the so long I've lost count. So if you're new and you're coming into this, I'm not saying, and I don't think Amanda is either, don't homeschool your kids because building community is hard. It's still the best decision I've ever made for my kids. But at the same time, when you join these groups and people are like, well, there's so many groups, you just join a group and blah, blah, blah. Okay, but it's also not that easy. And so if you're feeling like it's not easy, or you're feeling like, what's wrong with me because I can't find my people, we don't seem to fit into any of these groups, you're not alone. Amanda and I have tons of homeschool mom friends. we all share the same things. So it's like, how are there this many groups and yet no one feels like they belong? What are we doing wrong as a community of homeschoolers that this is a thing? It's so interesting.
Yeah, no, and to that point, I like sorry, my nose is super itchy today. I can keep sorry.
If you're watching on YouTube, it's all good. If you're
I'm so sorry. Right? Like again, we don't hide our messes and things are a little crazy around here.
some days are
Um
like that.
yeah, some days, right? Um but what I was going to say is that in our lives, I have for the most part, we've been pretty lucky. The kids that my kiddo enjoys, I like their parents as well. So that's worked out quite nicely because he's still, he's 10. He's not driving himself to hang out with his friends. There's a lot of shuttling and then usually, hanging out and waiting for them to do whatever and us talking about whatever. And so we're lucky that that works. But we have one group and there are two brothers and he likes both of the brothers and they play and I like their mom. And so in this whole group, we have this friend from that group, right? And then we have this other group that's a very different group. And there's a brother and a sister in that group, and they all three get along really well. And I really like that mom. And so we have that friend. But those two groups never do any of the same things, and neither one of those friends are in those same groups, right? So now I have a friend here and I have a friend there, and my closest homeschool mom friends that I share the most with and I bat ideas around with and have the most connection, they're from all over the world, right? And we meet once a week on Zoom to talk and catch up because it's hard to find a group
Yeah.
all in the same place, right? It's hard.
Yeah. I mean, we've mentioned in previous episodes, Amanda and I have never met in person. We've been in the same virtual book club for years and
Mhm.
reading parenting books. And we get together on Sunday nights and we all chat. Sometimes we show up and we have great book dialogue. Sometimes we show up and we've all had a train wreck of a week and we never talk about the book. Right. But and then we have a group chat that goes. And that group chat, I've been in situations sometimes where I'm in a meeting or I'm driving where I've had to mute the group chat because
Yeah.
it's on fire about something. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to have to mute this for an hour and circle back to it. But it's nice to at least have, and I think I've only met one person in that group in person. And it's really nice. But here's the funny thing. So when my kid goes to not back to school camp this year, getting a flight cross country, he's going to camp. We're in Charleston, the camp's in Oregon. He's actually staying at one of the parents' houses that's in my book club. I've never met this woman. And I messaged her and said, listen, he has to be in by 2 p.m. There's no flights that get him in by 2 p.m. Can I fly him in the day before? Can he couch surf? And she was like, yep, send him on over. Right. And so it's amazing to have this kind of network of people. But yeah, it would kind of be nice to just have a friend that you could go to a coffee shop with and kind of have those relationships with, which is pretty tough.
Or even better, to have a group of friends and the kids all got along and you all got along and you got together and the kids were messing around doing their own thing and you were sitting there like actually just having those like conversations that fill your cup, right? Like you're just hanging
Yes.
out with a bunch of mom friends. They understand. There's not that weird, like, oh, I don't know how to talk to you about what you're doing with school. And you're not, like you don't have to go to the game on Thursday and you don't, like you're all just hanging around and you're having adult beverages or you're drinking fresh lemonade. I don't care what you're drinking, but like, like it would be amazing. And,
Yeah.
you mentioned that you run a group and your kids have a hard time connecting.
In my own
I
group.
Yeah, in your own group. And I do a similar thing. It's not specifically for homeschooling, but I run a moms group for urban moms. And so it's part online. I admin the online group, but then we do a weekly, or sorry, not a weekly, but a monthly happy hour where kids are welcome. Um, and it's something I enjoy it. I enjoy bringing the community together. But we've yet to have a kid within 4 years age of my own kid come. And so he's usually he can play with any age. And so he will play with the kids and he's usually in charge of helping corral them and keep an eye on the toddlers and that sort of thing. And the women are all very nice. I meet interesting women and we share interesting stories, but I don't I've yet to make a really good friend from that. Um, and so, just because you have proximity, it's it's still really hard to get those good conversations, right? Like I crave those good, deeper conversations, and it would be amazing to be able to do it with a whole group of people to share ideas and experiences, and also to be able to have a big enough group that when you're having like one of those days that you just want to sit and be quiet but be surrounded by amazing people, you can do that, right? When it's
Yeah.
one on one and you've made a coffee date and it's like, I'm really sorry, but today's just one of those days that I got nothing. This is a pretty lame coffee date with a friend, right?
Yeah, I just need some peace and quiet and to know that you're there.
Yeah.
So, but I love that you said the proximity is there, but it hasn't equaled friendships. Isn't that public school in a nutshell? Because
Yeah.
that's the thing. Well, what about socialization, right? That is proximity, but it has nothing to do with whether or not your kid is going to find somebody that is a special person to them, that is a long-lasting friendship, that is a deeper connection. That's not guaranteed for our kids, even in school. I mean, they're having kind of these high-level, frivolous friendships usually with school friends, and maybe they find one, maybe they find two, but they're not really going to find a ton.
Yeah, it's not guaranteed you're going to have a whole group of friends just because you went to public school together or brick and
No.
mortar school, any kind of brick and mortar school, private school. It doesn't matter, right?
Yeah. So I did start a group, and I know you said you started a group. I specifically started a secular teen homeschool group, and we have a Friday night hangout. The goal of the entire thing was low maintenance. So I feel like a lot of time in the homeschool community or anything, just in life in general, do you ever sit around and somebody says, somebody should really do something about that, right? But everybody is sitting around saying, somebody should really do something about that. Like at some point, somebody has to step up and be that somebody. So
Hmm.
there were very few options for teens and homeschoolers in our area. And I was really looking for something for my own kids. We had moved here. We had moved to Texas in June of 2020. So they made no friends in Texas the 2 years that we were there because of the pandemic. They had their online friends and that was great. But I was looking to jump back into real homeschool environments like we had in the state before that. And so I created this group, and it is the most basic group you could imagine. We meet on Friday nights at 7 p.m. And my hope was that eventually the teens would kind of take it over as they got a little older, because they're kind of a younger set of teens.
Hmm.
So like 14, 15, there's I think maybe two 16-year-olds in there. So I thought, okay, eventually when they're driving and stuff like that, they're kind of programmed that Friday night I hang out with my homeschool teen friends, right? And we do this, we do that. So the rotation is exactly the same every month. First week, board games at Pizza Hut. The second week, creative night at Panera, which has turned into board games because the teens decided board games are pretty much all the time. The third week is board games at Chipotle. And the fourth week used to be outdoor movie night at my house. But the kids were never watching the movie and always playing board games still. They just love board games, which is great. I love that. But recently, my life has just gotten bananas with work commitments and things like that. And so another person took over that night and shifted it to Chick-fil-A. And the kids sit there and eat some nuggets and play board games and have a wonderful evening. So it is literally, and then the next month rolls around and it's the same four things again and again, right? So we're not calling and, scheduling things where we need a minimum of 10 people and they have to prepay and we have to, no, I do not have time for that, right?
Hmm.
So if you are looking to build community, it doesn't have to be super fancy. There are some groups out there where it's, amazing field trips and this and that. And, people are organizing stuff and they're collecting payments. And I do not have time for that in my life. I just don't. So I was thinking, okay, if there's anybody who joins my group and doesn't like how repetitive it is, then start your own group because no one else was doing it.
Hmm.
So that's it. So if you do want to start something, it doesn't have to be super complex and super amazing. I mean, I tried to change up the themes a little bit so that we had 2 board game nights and we had a creative night where the kids could bring Legos or a coloring book, like an adult coloring book or knitting, whatever. At Panera, they turned it into board game night. I had movie night. They turned it into board game night. They didn't even want the variety. So it doesn't have to be amazing. They just enjoyed getting together. But yeah, so my boys came to the first couple and they were like, this is not for us. And I'm thinking, I started this group for all of you.
For you.
So, right? And so my boys enjoy card shops. They're Pokemon kids, Yu-Gi-Oh kids. So they go to Yu-Gi-Oh on Friday night. My oldest can drive. He takes them both to Yu-Gi-Oh, whatever. So my daughter stayed in teen club and it's been months and she's met 2 kids that she enjoys their company, their acquaintances. She appreciates them and etc. But she's not making an effort to talk to them outside of teen club. She's not, super disappointed if somebody's, away out of town for the week and they're not at teen. She's like, whatever, she just really hasn't connected with anybody on that level. She does have a best friend who doesn't live locally, and they talk every day. So she's got a social network to an extent. But yeah, it's been tough to build community.
And I hear what you're saying, but on the flip side, I know for me personally, sometimes I get nearly as much value out of an acquaintance get together as I do a deep friend. I have a few really close friends that I would drop everything and fly across the United States for, right? And then I have a much larger circle of friends and on down to acquaintances, but I will specifically schedule things that I know that I'm just going to go and make small talk with other people. And I'm excited if it's a few people that I connect with, that I actually enjoy there, but we don't necessarily do things outside of that organized thing. And there are times that that's enough for me. I have a lot on my plate as well, right? And everyone does, but I feel like as homeschooling moms, you especially do because you're on like full in all the time. And then, most of us are juggling some kind of a part-time job or some kind of regular volunteer commitment or yada, yada. I mean, the list goes on, plus all of the household stuff that you inevitably end up with because, well, you're home and right, you're home with your kids all the time. Surely you can handle all of that. That's a whole other podcast, right? A whole other episode. But, that consistency of I can go, I can talk to these people, and I have that interaction, but I don't feel the pressure to like, well, I didn't text this week. And so I hope, I hope they don't feel like I wasn't there. I didn't care. Like, no, we are cool with the fact that we touch base once a week and sometimes we miss it, but we have a nice chat. And even being able to build that level of community is, it's pretty important.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. That makes sense. I tend to find acquaintances tiring. I can't admit that out loud to anyone who's listening, but I find small talk tiring when it's not meaningful conversation.
Okay.
And so, but I can see what you're saying. And so that makes sense. And maybe, and the importance of what you're saying is that my kids might not perceive acquaintances the same way I do. Mm-hmm. So I appreciate that viewpoint because it might be more meaningful to them than it is for me.
Yeah, I could totally see that. And I need both, right? I'm pretty extroverted. I'm that crazy person. I love holiday shopping. I love Black Friday shopping. Not that I'm necessarily going for the deals, but for years and years and years, I have loved going to the mall during Black Friday shopping to just be surrounded by that energy.
The energy of it, yeah.
The energy is just pulsing, right? And there's so many people and the music is great and I love it, right? and I know that's not normal. But yeah, so the acquaintances and that, it is small talk, but it's still interesting and it's getting to know people and I enjoy that. And that's an important piece of my social and mental wellness, happiness kind of puzzle, right?
I like that. Yeah. It's always good to get another perspective on it. I appreciate that. So I think the bottom line on socialization and finding your people is it's not as easy as everyone will make it sound like it is. right? I'm in a group in my town for women over 40, and everybody's saying the same thing. I mean, people basically put out personal ads, like, it'll be it'll be like, I read smut, and I have a dog. Is anybody does anybody want to get a cup of coffee?
Mhm.
And everybody, it seems like, is trying to find those connections, and I
Mhm.
think it says a lot about society more than it does about you as an individual, that we're busier than we've ever been. We're more spread thin than we've ever been, and everybody's struggling to kind of find those connections, I think. So, yeah, I think that's a huge thing. And I haven't even gotten to the point before we move on to our segments of the week. And then I neglected to mention, it was on my head earlier. Sometimes you join a group and there's cliques too, right? Have you had
Mm.
that experience?
Yeah.
There was a mom at our co-op in North Carolina. I called her Regina George because
Oh.
she was just, and it was just this solid click. And it was like, we're besties and our kids are besties and nobody can be besties with us. And I was like, how freaking old are you? Right? How
Yeah.
old are you? This is ridiculous. Right. And so, yeah, you're not alone. We're all swimming through the same murky water when it comes to trying to build community. We're not here to tell you that it's easy, but I wouldn't not homeschool as a result
Mhm.
of it. It's still not even by a close margin is it still the preference. So it's worth it, but just know that you're not alone if you're experiencing that.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, our rotating segment for this week, which I'm super excited about, this is our third segment. Our first week we did Student Spotlight. Last week we did Messy Moments. This week we've got recommended resources for you, and then next week in episode 4 we have a really fun segment for you that I think you'll appreciate. Before we do, Amanda's going to take on our recommended resources for the week. Before we do that, I just want to say we're on podcasting streaming services. We're also on YouTube. Give us a like if you enjoy our content. Give us a follow. We're so happy that you're here. And then you'll get notified of new episodes. And we've got some really awesome stuff. We're a new podcast, but we've got some really awesome stuff lined up over the coming months that we're really excited to share with you. So, all right. So without further ado,
Recommended resources. Do you need more homeschool supplies? No.
now,
Are you going to want these anyway? Absolutely.
yeah, absolutely. Right. So I'm not a
Yes.
huge buying of resources thing because of our school type, but Amanda has awesome recommendations. And so what you got for us this week, Amanda?
Yeah, so I thought that since our first few episodes are pretty foundational, right, and we're talking about the beginnings of homeschooling, that I would keep it pretty simple, but I'm going to do a plug for phonics instruction. Now, I know that not everyone actively teaches reading. Um, I want to encourage folks listen to our podcast, but there's another great podcast called Sold a Story, and it talks about phonics instruction, why there isn't much phonics instruction, why public schools aren't teaching it, and why they need to be, and kind of like all of the history of that and the science of reading and what that means and what that looks like. You've probably seen or heard about it if you're following any kind of parenting stuff these days. It's a pretty big, like, jargony thing. So if you are choosing to homeschool after your kid has been in public school for a year or two, and you're like, you know what, this isn't working, we're going to pull him out, we're going to homeschool. Or even if you're one of those people who's like, I don't know if I really want to homeschool, but I'm listening to this podcast anyway, I really encourage you to just take a step back and check to make sure that your kid actually learned phonics. It's kind of important. So, to that end, some of my favorite phonics resources for home use are, starting from maybe the easiest to the a little bit more in depth. So, there's a workbook or a couple of workbooks. They're called home workbooks, and there's phonics for kindergarten and phonics for first grade. And they're both from the Carson DeLosa Company. These are super quick and easy and pretty fun as far as workbooks go. They're little, they're colorful, they have an assortment of things in them, and they're almost always under $5. So, like, great resource. You can find them on Amazon and a few other places. But I think these are a great place to just like double check, make sure that your kid has a basic understanding of phonics. If you're really not going to convince your kid to do a workbook, even if it has fun colors and gold stars in the back, you can do Hooked on Phonics. We've all heard of it, right? There's the jingle. We have an idea of what it is. But Hooked on Phonics now has an online version. It's super gamified. It's really fun. It's got these fun, cute monsters and all of this stuff going on. Um, but it's great. And I really recommend it. And I also love the fact that you can do the first month as a trial for $1. So now keep in mind, it's one of those membership things. So if you do the dollar, if you're not careful, it'll auto renew for a lot more. Keep all of that in mind. But we did it for just 1 month. My kid loved it. He made huge progress in that month, and we spent just the $1 because I was happy with that 1 month of it. But I think it's a great, fun way, right? Some kids just love things when it's on the iPad far more than if it's in a book. And so by all means, give it a try.
Yeah.
Now, if you really want to go all in on phonics and you like curriculum, which that's me, I will totally admit that's me, right? I really, really like All About Reading. So it's a multi-sensory curriculum, hands-on games, alphabet tiles, flashcards. There's readers with lots of different stories. A lot of them focus on animal characters and that kind of thing. There's worksheets. Really, it's just the whole works in one curriculum. It's kind of set up to go each year, level 1, level 2, level 3 by kind of grade level. It can be on the expensive side. I'm not going to lie. It's a full curriculum. So if you buy new, it can cost a couple $100s. That said, if your budget is tight, absolutely look for a used version, either locally or on sites like eBay. I personally sell mine every year at the end. We would always list it on eBay, and it always goes, right? There's lots of interest there, and that's an available option. So those are kind of your 3. I personally have used all of them, and I think they're all great. And at this point, we're not getting kickbacks for anything. So they're truly just my recommendations.
Exactly. I'm wondering too if there's even like an All About Reading Facebook group. Like I know there's a Matthew C. buy sell group for Matthew C. manipulatives and things like that. And so maybe there's even like an All About Reading, because there's also like All About Spelling and stuff like that. So maybe there's a group that kind of focuses on those where people buy sell curriculum there too. If I was looking for it, I'd do that and eBay and whatever else,
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you, Amanda, for your recommendations. I wouldn't have known any of those things without you. So I appreciate learning something new today. Very good. Well, our mantra for the week is, I am the CEO of this homeschool circus, which sometimes it can feel like a circus. I am the CEO of this homeschool circus, leading with flair and a dash of sarcasm, where even chaos has its educational purpose. And that is very true.
Absolutely. You can learn so much from chaos.
Yeah.
Including
and
flexibility,
so can your kids.
Adaptability, and things you had no idea you wanted to learn, but you're really excited and you learned something really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I've brought it up. We've moved so many times, and my kids are masterful at the life skills associated with those transitions and things like that after this, because we've done it so many times for my husband's job. And those are skills that are really important in life, and they've picked it up organically just from the chaos of our lives. And so, yeah, it's been interesting, but good times. So our second episode of this week will be our book club episode, where we'll be talking about Teach Your Own by John Holt and Pat Ferenga. And then our episode next week, we're super excited about. We have our first guest in next week's episode. We have Juliana Coburn, who's joining us to talk about virtual co-ops. So it kind of actually ties in perfectly to what we talked about today. If you're struggling to find your community locally, there are virtual communities. And to our point earlier, Amanda and I met through a virtual community. You can form very deep, powerful connections through virtual community, and so can your kids. So Juliana will be on next week to tell us about that. So we're super excited about it. But anyway, have a wonderful rest of your day. Happy homeschooling, and we'll talk to you soon.
Yes. Have a good one.